When Jessica Thompson called the police about an illegal street racing operation in her precious HOA, she had no idea she was about to pick a fight with the mayor's office. But more importantly, she had no idea she was about to lose everything she'd spent 15 years building. The custom Ferrari F8 Tributo that had been driving her crazy for weeks wasn't just some rich kid's toy. It was about to become her worst nightmare. The morning Alex Chen first drove through the gates of Maple Grove Estates, heads turned. Not because he was young, successful, or Asian, though all of those things would soon become thorns in Jessica Thompson's side. No. What caught everyone's attention was the distinctive purr of Italian engineering, a sound that seemed to make the perfectly manicured lawns vibrate with possibility. His Ferrari F8 Tributo, custom painted in a deep midnight blue that caught the summer sun like liquid sapphire, rolled to a stop in front of a stunning colonial ale home at the end of Oak Bend Drive. The house itself was impressive. 4 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and the kind of wraparound porch that practically screamed old money. But it was the car that made curtains twitch and neighbors pause their morning routines. Alex had done his homework before buying in Maple Grove Estates. He'd read every page of the HOA bylaws, confirmed there were no restrictions on vehicle types, and even checked local noise ordinances. At 25, he knew people would look for any reason to doubt him. Being the youngest tech CEO in the state had taught him to always be 3 steps ahead. The first signs that something was off came before he'd even finished unloading. Eyes watching from behind pristine bay windows, whispered conversations that stopped when he glanced over, the kind of silence that felt heavy with judgment. But Alex was used to being underestimated. He just didn't know yet how far one person would go to try to prove him wrong. Jessica Thompson's arrival was like a scene from a movie about suburban power plays. Her heels clicked against the concrete with military precision as she made her way up his driveway. Pearl earrings caught the morning light, matching the silver HOA president pin on her crisp navy blazer. Everything about her screamed authority, from her perfectly styled blonde bob to the leather portfolio clutched in her manicured hands. "Mr. Chen?" she said, not bothering to hide how she assessed both him and the Ferrari. Her smile was practiced, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "I'm Jessica Thompson, president of the Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association." Alex extended his hand, offering the kind of smile that had helped him close million-dollar deals. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. I was just getting settled in." Her gaze slid past him to the Ferrari, lingering on the custom exhaust system. "Yes, I noticed. That's quite an interesting vehicle choice for our community." "Is there a problem?" Alex asked, keeping his tone light but firm. "I've reviewed all the HOA guidelines. There are no restrictions on vehicle types." Something flickered across Jessica's face. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance at finding someone who'd done their research. She recovered quickly, but not before Alex caught it. "Well, we do have noise ordinances, and concerns about street racing have been raised in the past." Alex's expression didn't change, but he made a mental note. She was already looking for an angle, even though the car hadn't been there for more than an hour. "I assure you, Mrs. Thompson, I follow all local traffic laws. Feel free to check my record. It's spotless." Jessica's smile tightened just slightly. "Of course. Still, I should review our bylaws just to be certain everything is appropriate." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and welcome to Maple Grove Estates, Mr. Chen. I'm sure you'll find we have very high standards here." As she walked away, Alex watched her go, noting how she paused to speak with 2 neighbors who had, coincidentally, decided to check their mail at the same time. He couldn't hear what was said, but he didn't need to. The way they looked back at his house and his car told him everything he needed to know. Alex pulled out his phone and opened his camera, carefully documenting the position and condition of his Ferrari. Something told him he was going to need proof of everything from now on. What Jessica Thompson didn't know was that when it came to protecting his interests, Alex had learned from the best. After all, you don't become the mayor's son without picking up a few things about power plays. The first shot in Jessica Thompson's war came at exactly 7:15 a.m., 3 days after Alex moved in. He had just started his Ferrari, letting it idle for the recommended warm-up period, a standard practice for any high-performance vehicle. The sound wasn't excessive, barely louder than the lawn service trucks that regularly prowled the neighborhood, but it was enough. "Mr. Chen?" Jessica's voice cut through the morning air, clipboard already in hand. "We've received complaints about excessive noise from your vehicle. Several neighbors have reported being woken up by your activities." She emphasized the last word like it was something distasteful. Alex kept his expression neutral, though he noticed she hadn't bothered to name these supposed complainants. "The car's stock exhaust is well within legal decibel limits, Mrs. Thompson. I'd be happy to show you the specifications." She ignored his offer, instead producing a yellow notice from her clipboard. "This is your first warning regarding noise violations. Further incidents will result in fines." She placed it under his windshield wiper, the paper stark against the midnight blue paint. That afternoon, Alex discovered 3 other Maple Grove residents owned luxury sports cars: a Porsche 911, a Lamborghini Urus, and a McLaren 570S. None had ever received noise complaints. He photographed each vehicle, noting dates and times, then added the images to a growing digital folder labeled documentation. The notes started appearing a week later. Printed on expensive cardstock, they materialized on his windshield like leaves in autumn. "Sports cars belong on racetracks, not in family neighborhoods. This isn't Monaco. Consider your neighbors." Each one carefully worded to avoid direct accusations while making the message clear: "You don't belong here." Alex collected each note, carefully placing them in plastic sleeves with timestamps and locations. He also installed discrete security cameras covering his driveway and the street, high-end equipment that captured crystal-clear footage day and night. The cameras caught Jessica driving past his house 6 times one Saturday morning, phone in hand as she documented his car's presence. During an evening walk, Alex overheard snippets of conversation from a concerned neighbors meeting on Barbara Wilson's front porch. Jessica's voice carried clearly: "He's obviously running some kind of racing operation. Did you see those modifications? Those aren't street legal." Alex had to suppress a smile. Every modification on his F8 was not only legal but certified by Ferrari themselves. He had the paperwork to prove it, already scanned and added to his growing file. The campaign escalated when Jessica called an emergency HOA meeting about vehicle restrictions. Alex attended, sitting quietly in the back, as she presented a slideshow of problem vehicles in the community. Somehow, only his Ferrari made the cut, shown from multiple angles with red circles highlighting perfectly standard features. "We need to consider implementing stricter guidelines," Jessica announced, her voice dripping with false concern. "For safety reasons, of course. We can't have street racing in our community." That's when Alex noticed Stephen Reynolds, another board member, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The older man's eyes kept darting between Alex and Jessica, his expression troubled. After the meeting, Stephen lingered in the parking lot, waiting until Jessica left before approaching Alex. "Look," Stephen said quietly, glancing around. "This isn't right. She's done this before, targeted younger homeowners, found ways to push them out. Last year it was a tech couple with a too modern house design. Before that, a single woman with a home business she claimed violated zoning laws." Alex thanked Stephen for the information, then spent the next week digging through county records. He found 5 cases in the past 3 years where young homeowners had sold their properties shortly after facing multiple HOA violations. The pattern was clear as crystal. Meanwhile, Jessica's scrutiny intensified. Security cameras throughout the neighborhood, supposedly installed for community safety, seemed to focus exclusively on his property. Reports of late-night engine revving began circulating even on nights when his car hadn't moved from the garage. Alex continued his quiet documentation, noting every incident, every interaction. He recorded conversations on his phone, saved security footage, and photographed every notice. But he also started making calls. Careful, strategic conversations with city officials who knew his father well. The tension reached a new level when Jessica proposed an amendment to the HOA bylaws. Vehicles with modifications affecting noise levels or aesthetic appearance must be approved by the board. The proposal was clearly targeted at Alex's Ferrari, but its broad language would have affected dozens of residents with aftermarket wheels, custom paint jobs, or even different exhaust systems. That's when Alex decided to let his father know what was happening. Not to intervene, not yet, but to ensure the right people were watching. Because Alex had noticed something interesting. Jessica Thompson's crusade against his Ferrari wasn't just about noise or aesthetics. It was about control, about maintaining her vision of what Maple Grove Estates should be, and she was willing to bend or break rules to enforce that vision. Little did she know, Alex had spent years watching his father navigate political waters far more treacherous than an HOA president's power play. He understood exactly how to document discrimination, build a case, and wait for the perfect moment to act. Every move Jessica made against him was another piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. As autumn crept into the neighborhood, bringing crisp mornings and golden leaves, Jessica Thompson thought she was closing in on her prey, but with each passing day, each new complaint, each thinly veiled threat, she was actually sealing her own fate. The mayor's son had learned patience from the best, and his revenge would be served as cold as a November morning in Tennessee. Alex just needed one more thing: Jessica to make a big enough mistake that not even her most loyal supporters could ignore it. And knowing her pattern, that mistake was coming soon. The first police cruiser arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, lights flashing against pristine garage doors. Officer Martinez stepped out, looking slightly embarrassed as he approached Alex's driveway, where the Ferrari sat gleaming in the autumn sun. Behind him, Jessica Thompson stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Sorry about this, sir," Officer Martinez said quietly. "We received a complaint about an illegal street racing operation." He glanced at the Ferrari, then back at his notebook. Multiple reports of high-speed vehicles and late-night gatherings. Alex nodded calmly, already pulling out his phone. "I understand, officer. Would you like to see the security footage from my cameras? They cover the street 24/7. You can verify there's been no racing activity." He paused, then added, "I'd also be happy to show you the car's GPS tracking data, which logs every trip." Jessica's smile faltered slightly as Officer Martinez reviewed the footage. The police officer's expression shifted from professional concern to barely concealed annoyance at having his time wasted. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Chen. Your vehicle modifications are all street legal, and I don't see any evidence of racing activity." As the officer left, Alex caught Jessica's glare. She didn't speak, but her message was clear. This wasn't over. That afternoon, every mailbox in Maple Grove Estates received an urgent community bulletin about ongoing safety concerns and unauthorized vehicle gatherings. The HOA board called an emergency meeting the following week. Alex arrived early, noting how Jessica had arranged the room. A panel table up front for the board members, with him strategically seated directly in their line of sight. Classic intimidation tactics that he recognized from his father's political opponents. "We're here to address serious concerns about vehicular violations," Jessica began, her voice carrying that familiar note of manufactured concern. "Multiple residents have reported—" "Excuse me," Alex interrupted politely, "but could you identify these residents? As the accused, I have the right to face my accusers according to HOA bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 3. A heavy silence fell over the room. Jessica's perfectly manicured nails drummed once on the table. "The complainants wish to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation." "Retaliation?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "Like having the police called on false pretenses? Or perhaps like having security cameras specifically directed at one resident's property?" He pulled out his tablet, bringing up time-stamped photos. "These were taken over the past month. Notice how the cameras were repositioned to focus solely on my driveway." Murmurs rippled through the assembled residents. Stephen Reynolds, the sympathetic board member, leaned forward with interest. Other board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jessica quickly moved to regain control. "We've drafted new vehicle guidelines that will address these issues." She began distributing copies of a document titled Proposed amendment, vehicle appearance and noise restrictions. Alex scanned the document, noting how carefully it had been worded to target his Ferrari while appearing generally applicable. But Jessica had made a crucial mistake in her haste. The amendment violated state laws regarding retroactive rule enforcement. The community began to divide openly after that meeting. Younger residents, many of whom had their own modified vehicles, started speaking up. The Wilsons, with their modified Jeep Wrangler, approached Alex after the meeting to share their own stories of harassment. The Patels, whose college-age son had a customized BMW, offered security footage showing Jessica specifically monitoring certain homes. But Jessica's supporters dug in deeper. Anonymous complaints multiplied, notes appeared on cars, whispered conversations stopped when certain residents walked by. The tension built like a pressure cooker, with Jessica constantly turning up the heat. Then came the towing threat. Alex returned home one evening to find a bright orange sticker on his Ferrari. Unconnected vehicle, subject to immediate towing. The notice cited a bylaw that didn't exist, but Jessica had already contacted a towing company. She stood in her driveway across the street, phone in hand, watching, waiting for his reaction, expecting him to finally lose his cool, to give her the confrontation she'd been pushing for. Instead, Alex smiled and waved, taking pictures of the fraudulent notice. He called the police himself to report attempted vehicle theft, calmly explaining the situation to the responding officers. As they spoke with him, Alex could see Jessica's face turning red, even from across the street. That evening, she made her final move. A certified letter arrived by courier. Notice of emergency HOA board vote, resolution to remove unauthorized vehicles. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. The letter included a detailed list of accusations, each more outrageous than the last. Alex read through it carefully, then made 2 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, the second was to his father's office. It was time to end this. Jessica had no idea, but she'd just played right into his hands. Every false accusation, every manipulated rule, every abuse of power was documented and ready. She thought Friday's meeting would be her moment of triumph, the final step in driving out another unwanted resident. Instead, it would be the night Jessica Thompson learned exactly who she'd been trying to bully. As Alex filed the papers his lawyer had prepared, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't just winning, it was letting your opponent defeat themselves. The Maple Grove Estates Community Center had never been so packed. By 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the emergency HOA meeting, every chair was filled. Residents stood along the walls, their conversations a low buzz of anticipation. Jessica Thompson sat at the head table, arranging papers with precise movements, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light. The Ferrari's distinctive engine note cut through the murmur of voices. Heads turned toward the windows as Alex Chen pulled into the parking lot, the midnight blue F8 Tributo gliding into a spot directly in front of the building's entrance. Jessica's lips tightened almost imperceptibly as she watched him park. "Let's bring this meeting to order," Jessica announced, her voice carrying that practiced authority that had intimidated residents for years. "We're here to address ongoing violations and vote on the removal of unauthorized vehicles from our community." Officer Martinez stood near the door. Jessica had insisted on police presence in case of disturbance. What she hadn't noticed was how he'd nodded respectfully to Alex when he entered, or the slight smile they'd exchanged. "Over the past 3 months," Jessica continued, pulling up a PowerPoint presentation, "we've documented numerous violations." Photos of Alex's Ferrari filled the screen, each marked with red circles highlighting perfectly legal modifications. Street racing activities, noise violations, unauthorized gatherings. "Excuse me," Alex's voice cut through her presentation, calm but firm. "Before we continue, I'd like to distribute some documents of my own." He stood, pulling out a stack of folders. Stephen Reynolds, the sympathetic board member, began passing them out. Jessica's expression flickered. "We're following a specific agenda. According to HOA bylaws, any resident may present relevant documentation during a voting meeting," Alex replied, again with that same measured tone. "I believe you'll find these materials very relevant." The The folders contained meticulously organized evidence, time-stamped photos of other modified vehicles in the community, sound-level readings showing his Ferrari's compliance with local ordinances, and most importantly, a pattern of selective enforcement that couldn't be ignored. Now, Alex continued, opening his own folder, let's discuss the actual bylaws regarding vehicles. Not the ones you've proposed, Mrs. Thompson, but the ones legally in effect. He began projecting his own presentation. You'll notice there are no restrictions on vehicle modifications, no specific noise requirements beyond city ordinances, and certainly no provisions for selective enforcement based on a resident's age or background. Jessica's face had begun to redden. This is not the proper forum for— Actually, a new voice spoke from the back of the room, I believe this is exactly the proper forum. The crowd parted as Mayor James Chen walked in, followed by two city officials. Especially given the documentation we've received about discriminatory practices and abuse of HOA authority. The room went dead silent. Jessica's face drained of color as she looked between Alex and the mayor, realization dawning in her eyes. I don't understand. What is this? What this is, Mrs. Thompson, Alex said quietly, is accountability. Every false complaint, every manipulated rule, every attempt to drive out residents who don't fit your preferred demographic, it's all here. He gestured to the folders. Including your pattern of targeting younger homeowners, particularly minorities, over the past 3 years. Stephen Reynolds stood up from the board table. I can confirm these patterns. I've watched it happen repeatedly, and I regret not speaking up sooner. Other residents began nodding, the dam of silence finally breaking. The Patel's son with his BMW, someone called out. The Wilsons' Jeep got targeted too, another added. Remember that young couple with the modern house design? They left after 3 months of harassment. Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she shuffled her papers. These are all legitimate enforcement actions, like calling in false police reports about street racing. Officer Martinez stepped forward. We take those kinds of false reports very seriously, Mrs. Thompson. They waste police resources and can have serious consequences. Mayor Chen moved to the front of the room. The city has received multiple complaints about discriminatory practices in this HOA. We've been monitoring the situation, gathering evidence. What we've found is deeply troubling. Jessica's practiced composure finally cracked. You can't do this. I've run this community for 15 years. I've maintained our standards, our property values. By harassment and selective enforcement, Alex finished for her. By making up rules that don't exist and applying real ones unfairly. Jessica's eyes narrowed as the full picture became clear. You planned this. All of it. You knew exactly who you were and what you were doing. Alex smiled slightly. I learned from the best, Mrs. Thompson. In politics and in business, documentation is everything, and you've given me plenty to document. The mayor stepped forward, placing a thick envelope on the table. This is an official notice from the city regarding an investigation into discriminatory housing practices. Additionally, the district attorney's office will be reviewing the false police reports. Jessica's world was crumbling in front of her. The power she'd wielded so confidently was evaporating as her neighbors, her supporters, saw the truth laid bare. She looked around the room, searching for allies, but found only averted eyes and shocked expressions. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA president, Stephen Reynolds announced, standing. And I propose a complete review of all HOA practices and previous enforcement actions. Hands shot up around the room. The vote wasn't even close. As Jessica Thompson gathered her belongings, her hands shaking with rage and humiliation, Alex approached her quietly. You know what the saddest part is? All you had to do was treat people fairly. That's all anyone wanted. She didn't respond, just clutched her designer handbag closer and hurried toward the exit. But Alex had one final thing to say. Oh, and Mrs. Thompson, those noise complaints you filed? They're going to make interesting reading at the next city council meeting. My father's been wanting to reform HOA oversight for years. Thanks for helping make the case. The meeting lasted another hour as residents shared their stories, patterns emerged, and plans for reform were discussed. When Alex finally walked out to his Ferrari, the autumn night was cool and clear. He could hear scattered conversations in the parking lot, neighbors talking openly for the first time in years. Officer Martinez stopped by his car. "Nice work in there. Though I have to ask, did you buy that house knowing this would happen?" Alex ran a hand along the Ferrari's smooth hood. "Let's just say I did my research. Sometimes the best way to expose corruption is to give it a target it can't resist." As he started the engine, its purr echoing off the community center walls, Alex couldn't help but smile. Sometimes justice came with a soundtrack of Italian engineering, and in this case, it sounded absolutely perfect. Jessica Thompson's resignation was announced in a single terse email that read more like an obituary for her iron grip over Maple Grove Estates. It was a shocking turn of events for someone who had practically reigned over the community with the precision of a Swiss watch. What Jessica hadn't anticipated was how her pursuit of one young newcomer, Alex Chen, would unravel a tapestry of unchecked power and questionable ethics, leaving her no choice but to step down. The first domino fell when the city launched an investigation into the practices of the Maple Grove Estates HOA. Jessica's repeated attempts to weaponize HOA regulations against Alex didn't just catch the attention of the mayor's office, but also ignited a firestorm among the residents. Decades of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and punitive measures against younger homeowners and renters came into sharp focus. Jessica wasn't just forced to resign. She became the subject of multiple civil suits. Residents who had been targeted for minor infractions, like slightly mismatched paint shades or late HOA fees, began filing for restitution. One such case was that of the Davises, an elderly couple fined $10,000 for allegedly violating Jessica's aesthetic integrity clause because of their unapproved garden gnome. Their victory in small claims court set a precedent, opening the floodgates for dozens more. Meanwhile, the HOA board faced its reckoning. A restructuring was imminent, and for the first time board elections were publicized widely, drawing unprecedented interest from younger residents. Alex himself declined to run, citing his desire to focus on the car enthusiast community that had rallied around him during the drama. "I'm here to contribute, not control," he told reporters. For Alex, the aftermath wasn't just about winning, it was about healing. Instead of reveling in Jessica's fall from grace, Alex extended olive branches where many might have sought revenge. He reached out to residents who had initially sided with Jessica, hosting community meet and greets and car shows as neutral ground. These events did more than showcase his midnight blue Ferrari F8 Tributo. They became a space for rebuilding trust. One of the most touching moments came when a 16-year-old named Ethan, who had been quietly restoring a classic 1967 Mustang with his late father's tools, revealed his work at Alex's first car club event. "I thought people like me didn't belong here," Ethan admitted. Alex's response, offering to help finish the restoration, signified a cultural shift in Maple Grove. Younger residents weren't just participating in the community, they were defining it. Jessica's personal resolution, however, was less triumphant. The house she had painstakingly decorated to reflect her self-styled image as the neighborhood's gatekeeper went on the market within weeks of her resignation. Rumors swirled about her plans to move to a retirement community across town. It was a quieter, more controlled environment, one more suited to her desire for order. And perhaps one without the roar of custom exhaust systems. But her departure wasn't without a final, albeit unintended, act of community service. The sale of her home became a symbolic passing of the torch. The buyers, a young couple in their early 30s, complete with a toddler and an energetic golden retriever. They quickly became a hit at Alex meetups, signaling that the HOA's culture had finally shifted. The broader implications of the fallout extended beyond Maple Grove Estates. The city introduced new oversight measures for HOA practices, ensuring that no future board could wield unchecked power. Quarterly reviews, resident feedback sessions, and mandatory transparency in financial reporting became the norm. One council member, commenting on the scandal, quipped, "Jessica Thompson inadvertently did more to reform HOAs than any of our past legislative attempts." Age discrimination policies were also implemented. The glaring pattern of targeting younger homeowners and renters was officially addressed, with the HOA required to attend annual inclusivity training sessions. Ironically, Jessica's overreach had catalyzed the very demographic shift she had tried so hard to prevent. And yet, it wasn't just governance that changed. It was the community itself. The once frosty atmosphere warmed as younger residents began organizing events, farmers markets, outdoor movie nights, and yes, car shows. Alex's Car Enthusiast Club became a cornerstone of this new chapter. What started as a response to Jessica's aggression evolved into a thriving community of hobbyists, mentors, and friends. The sound of revving engines, once considered a nuisance, was now a hallmark of Maple Grove's vibrancy. Alex's own role in the community continued to grow. Though he never sought formal leadership, his calm, diplomatic approach to conflict resolution made him a natural mediator. Alex taught us that power doesn't have to look like control. It can look like compassion, said one board member during a meeting. Meanwhile, Alex reflected privately on the deeper lessons of the saga. Prejudice, he realized, could wear many masks: race, age, wealth. But power, too, had its blind spots. He committed himself to building bridges, both literally and figuratively, within Maple Grove and beyond. Jessica's downfall wasn't just a cautionary tale about the abuse of authority. It was a wake-up call about the power of collective action. Her story had started with whispers behind bay windows and ended with a community stronger, fairer, and louder, both figuratively and literally. It was a reminder that no amount of bylaws or pearl earrings could hold back the tide of change once it began. In the end, the story of Maple Grove Estates wasn't just about Alex and his Ferrari. It was about a neighborhood learning to listen, grow, and embrace its future. And if you ever visit Maple Grove now, you'll notice a little plaque near the community center commemorating the first annual car show. It reads, "Sometimes, the loudest engines bring the quietest revolutions."